Welcome to Tritiyo Matra. Emerging from a nation ravaged by war, natural disaster, famine, abject poverty, and political turmoil, in a mere 50 years, Bangladesh has risen to the second largest economy in South Asia and the 41st largest economies in the world. Due to an impressive economic growth rate, Bangladesh is also projected to become the 28th largest economy by 2030. Owing to its geopolitical location at a bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia, its access to the Bay of Bengal and its proximity to the region two greatest superpowers, the rapidly emerging Bangladesh now finds itself embroiled in a precarious geopolitical play where survival and prosperity depend on a delicate balancing act. The question now is, will these foreign powers restrict their concerns to Bangladesh's economic prospect and geostrategic value? Or will they also have a role to play in either fixing or exaggerating the internal backsliding state of Bangladesh's democracy? In today's show, we hope to discuss in depth Bangladesh's foreign policy struggles as it tries to maintain economic and diplomatic ties with India, the USA and its allies, and China. To discuss these delicate issues, it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest for today. We have with us Michael Kugelman. He is the writer of Foreign Policy's weekly South Asia Brief. He is the Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center in Washington. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we have with us Mr. Anwar. He is a fellow at Harvard University's Faculty of Arts and Sciences and a PhD student at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He is also joining us from Washington, D.C. Anu, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And let me start with Mr. Anwar. Anu, the main principle of Bangladeshi foreign policy is friendship towards all, malice towards none. How effective do you think it is considering the geopolitical scenario? Will Bangladesh be able to bargain for its benefit following the neutral policy?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's great to be with my dear friend Michael, and it is a very important topic to talk about. So I think that at the beginning statement, as you kindly alluded to some of the point, Bangladesh, for Bangladesh foreign policy, I think maintaining neutrality and diversification is option with different actor, whether it's regional or extra-regional power, is one of the key challenge, and it will be also one of the key determinant to be success. However, at the beginning, I would like to mention a few things that is often disregarded when people talk about Bangladesh or Bangladesh foreign policy, Bangladesh strategic value, and so on. International commentator and other, whenever you look at what they write about Bangladesh, is often portrayed as a small country. In international affairs, or when we talk about strategic affairs, I mean the word and discourse really matters. When you say it's a small country, it basically kind of undermine or it doesn't sound really like a country that has a strategic value. I would like to challenge that Bangladesh is by no means a small country. First of all, if you look, Bangladesh is bigger than North Korea, bigger than South Korea, bigger than Serbia, Greece, Portugal. Anybody in the world saying that those countries are small? No. But why people saying Bangladesh is small? Perhaps one of the compelling arguments so far I heard that Bangladesh is close to India. India is comparatively bigger, that's why Bangladesh is small. Even though that argument I cannot buy, because that Bangladesh, India is, let's say, 22 times on average bigger than Bangladesh. The same way, Japan, China is 25 times bigger than Japan. Nobody is saying Japan is a small country. And it's as per the population, Bangladesh is the 8th largest country in the world. And as you mentioned in your introductory remark, that Bangladesh economy now 41st largest, and it is going to be 28th largest in the world. So Bangladesh is not a small country. First, we have to accept this fact. And now many compelling argument I heard from some scholar that Bangladesh is rising middle power. That could be the fact. So we first need to reject Bangladesh is not a small country. And now, going forward, country like Bangladesh, we really need to diversify our options and engage with multiple actors. And neutrality, it would be difficult. That is the challenge for Bangladesh. It needs to weigh in with different actors. Good thing is, Bangladesh hadn't had so many options in the past. Not so many international actors wanted to engage with us in terms of economy and strategic affairs. But now we have seen growing interest from Turkey. We have seen growing interest from Western countries. And it's also alluded some of those facts. So we need to do multiple actors engagement.
Okay, Anu, I'll come to you again. Michael, China has emerged as a close economic partner to Bangladesh in recent times. From infrastructural projects to vaccine support, China's influence in Bangladesh seems to be growing in the last few years. Do you think this development will influence the foreign policy of Bangladesh in the future?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's great to be here with Anu, who I see as one of the great young scholars of Bangladesh. Clearly, China's increasing reach and influence in Bangladesh is significant. I think we need to see it in the broader context of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, which intends to bring infrastructure investments throughout South Asia, not just Bangladesh. But indeed, I think as we have seen Beijing scale up its presence in Bangladesh, which is not just seen through infrastructure, but it's also seen more recently through pandemic assistance, vaccine delivery, and that type of thing. We've seen that play out even as India, China's rival, has sought to scale up its own influence in Bangladesh, a country that, of course, as you would know, has a long history of relations with Bangladesh. Bangladesh does not want to be caught up in what appears to be a growing tug of war for influence between India and between China in Bangladesh. And I think we again need to see this in the broader context of South Asian geopolitics, in which China and India and a number of countries are really not fighting for influence, but they're competing for influence. And for a country like Bangladesh, which always asserts its foreign policy independence and autonomy, a country that does not want to find itself falling into a particular camp, that makes things a bit challenging for Bangladesh. It wants to balance its relations with Beijing and with New Delhi. And so as this competition between India and China intensifies in Bangladesh and in the region, that clearly poses more challenges for Dhaka as to how it seeks to navigate and balance this rivalry between India and China and Bangladesh's relations with those two countries.
Michael, from the liberation war of Bangladesh back in 1971, India and Bangladesh were close allies. But in recent times, I'm quoting from an article you both combinedly wrote, quote, New Delhi's generally cordial relationship with Dhaka has experienced bumps during Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tenure, unquote. There are long-standing tension points such as the killings of Bangladeshis by Indian border troops and India's refusal to finalize a transboundary water agreement with Bangladesh for the Tista River. What is your take on the future of the Indo-Bangladesh relationship? Michael.
Well, I think that you're right. I mean, as we noted in our foreign policy article, there have been some relatively new tensions that have cropped up, particularly seen through the Indian government's Hindu nationalist policy, which has led to a series of new laws, including a new citizenship law that Dhaka has found rather problematic. And indeed, that builds on these existing tensions that you noted in terms of water issues and other factors as well. New Delhi clearly wants to get the relationship right. New Delhi clearly wants to get the relationship with Bangladesh in a bigger place, especially because China has been capitalizing on these new tensions in India-Bangladesh relations. And I think it's quite significant that earlier this year, when you marked your 50-year celebration of independence, that Prime Minister Modi was in India. It was in Bangladesh. He was there in Dhaka to participate in those ceremonies in person. Many leaders did not come in person, but he did. So I think that's quite significant. There have been efforts to work through the water tensions, but to be quite honest, I think so long as the Modi government stays in power, and so long as the Hindu nationalist policies that come out of that government that we've seen, I think that's going to make it difficult for India-Bangladesh relations to get to a really good place where they would much rather be. And again, this is something that Beijing will try to capitalize on by trying to do what it can to convince Bangladesh to come more to its side. And of course, China will do that by expanding economic support, providing the infrastructure, the things that Bangladesh really needs. So bottom line is that I think that India and Bangladesh as well want the relationship to work, but I think that the policies that we see coming from this government in India make it difficult to expect this relationship to really flourish in a way that both countries, and especially India, would prefer. And this all redounds to the benefit of Beijing.
Michael, here is another question that Washington played an inactive role. There is a perception here during the Rohingya issue compared to the role played by other key players in international politics, so that is China and Russian Federation. Do you think that the USA could play a more active role on the issue? Michael?
Sorry, on the Rohingya issue? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
absolutely. And especially given that the Biden administration has elevated the issue of human rights and broader democracy as something that it sees as a pillar of its foreign policy. And we've seen the U.S., the administration make a lot of pronouncements on the importance of rights. And we, of course, had this democracy summit here in Washington a few weeks ago that Bangladesh, of course, was not invited to. Honestly, I think that the Rohingya issue is an issue that the two countries, the U.S. and Bangladesh, could use to talk about cooperation, just because here in Washington, there is not just acknowledgement, but appreciation, but the way in which Bangladesh has handled the issue of Rohingya refugees, which is a very sensitive, delicate issue, has been very good. And I think that Bangladesh has been widely appreciated here in Washington for efforts to do what it can to make their plight more comfortable in Bangladesh. That has not been something, so far as I know, that has really come up to the extent that there have been engagements between the U.S. and Bangladesh during the few months that we've had of the Biden administration. But I think that certainly this is something that the U.S. should be willing to engage with Bangladesh on more. I think that's very clear.
Anu, China's Belt and Road Initiative has caused dozens of lower and middle income countries to accumulate $385 billion in hidden debts to Beijing. According to a recently published study, Bangladesh is the second highest recipient of China's investment in South Asia after Pakistan, and Bangladesh is also considered a central location in one of the proposed corridors of the BRI. Do you think that Bangladesh could fall into a debt trap like some other countries?
No, I don't think so. First of all, if you look at the proportion of Bangladesh debt ratio to China, to multinational development bank and Japan, you see the ratio of Bangladesh debt ratio to China, I think it's less than 2% still, compared to the highest debt Bangladesh ratio has to against Japan and then other multinational companies. So Bangladesh has this experience to engage with different multinational company, multinational development bank and this development partner for many, many years. So Bangladesh know how to do this balancing act. If you look at the debt ratio of other countries towards China, is comparatively quite high. But Bangladesh debt ratio is quite low. That is why there is no possibility to falling into debt trap. But the other thing is that debt trap notion basically is not that evidence-based. Is it a kind of a narrative? But the people who done those study, for example, that John Hopkins professor Deborah Brathingham and the others, they did not find that China is pursuing actively debt trap diplomacy. So there is a certain kind of thing. Definitely there is a notion that if a country take extra debt, that definitely will give Beijing certain kind of leverage to take advantage of, but it's up to those countries whether they are going to take loan from Beijing and how much is that proportion to this other country's loan. From Bangladesh perspective, I don't see that is going to happen.
Michael, any comments on this?
No, I fully agree. I fully agree that there has been some really important scholarship that has pushed back against this idea that China's investments lead to debt, debt trap diplomacy and all that. But I think it is important to acknowledge that there are very good reasons, in my view, to be concerned about these Chinese investments, whether in Bangladesh or elsewhere in the region, just because of concerns about the lack of transparency, the lack of transparency around the contracts and other agreements that govern these loans and these deals. And also concerns about the lack of positive spillover effects that you would like to see with these investments, such as the transfer of technology, the use of local labor to spark employment in the local communities where these investments are happening. So I think that these are issues that deserve attention for sure. But it's true that there have been some really impressive and important sets of literature and scholarship that have pushed back against this notion of debt trap diplomacy, which is a great term. It sounds nice, it's very catchy, but it deserves a lot more examination. It's been getting that, and there has been some pushback against it, which is good.
Michael, I'm quoting from your joint article published on foreign policy. Quote, the right way for Washington to approach Dhaka is to view better relations between the two countries as a good thing in and of itself, as well as a logical next step given Bangladesh's economic rise. The wrong way to approach Bangladesh is to try to bring it into an anti-China condominium, an outcome that risks alienating Beijing, a key Bangladeshi economic partner, while depriving Dhaka of leverage over New Delhi, unquote. Would like to hear more about this statement from both of you. Michael, first.
Yeah, well, it's true that many in the U.S. Government, current and present, have long looked at Bangladesh through the lens of broader geopolitical issues in the region, particularly in terms of India-China rivalry, and so on. And what we argue in the piece is that Bangladesh is a country that is invested with significant levels of strategic importance based on its location, its economic success, its young, large, largely moderate population, and of course its relations with key countries like India and China. And so we argue that the wrong thing to do would be to try to see any type of U.S. engagement with Bangladesh as something that is meant to try to push Bangladesh away from China and into some type of US/India camp. Bangladesh is not interested in that type of politics, as we discussed before. It likes to assert its strategic autonomy, which of course is a term that India has used for quite some time about its own foreign policy. So I think that what would work best is for the US to look at Bangladesh, its relationship with Bangladesh through its own merits, and that means focusing on bilateral cooperation that does not necessarily anchored to whatever China or whatever India is up to. And I think that the US is to some extent on the right track. If you look at some of the policy documents that have come out of the US government over the last few years, you do see focus on how it's important for the US to scale up cooperation with Bangladesh in areas that include counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, anti-piracy, maritime cooperation. There have been a set of documents published under the rubric of the U.S. Indo-Pacific policy, documents that came from the State Department and the Pentagon, and they identify Bangladesh as one of the key countries for the U.S. to focus its relations, to focus on expanding its relations with in those areas. Now, certainly the ulterior motive here, since we're talking about the Indo-Pacific policy, is to build relations with countries around South Asia to strengthen or to broaden this consensus of countries willing to balance China. So that could be a bit problematic, but I think that if the focus, particularly in terms of the emphasis in public and private deliberations, is on the need to work with Bangladesh, an important country for the reasons that we mentioned earlier, to scale up cooperation in some of those areas that I mentioned, I think that would be one step on the right track. Finally, infrastructure assistance is something that Bangladesh certainly could use. The U.S. could play a role there, though we do acknowledge in our paper that that's an area where China has such a strong comparative advantage because of its ability to deliver high levels of capital to provide that support for infrastructure. It can do that so much better than the U.S. can, and especially with fewer conditions and on a lesser terms. So that's a challenge. But bottom line is it's important for the U.S. to look at Bangladesh as a country worth doing business with and worth engaging with in a way that you could scale up cooperation in a variety of different areas, regardless of what China and India are up to.
Yeah, Anu.
Yeah, I completely agree with Michael. He covered a lot of area. But in addition to that, I will just add that historically, U.S. policy has been, we have seen during Bangladesh liberation where U.S. Policy toward Pakistan-centric South Asia. And then these days, it is understandable that given India's size and largeness, US might have certain kind of preference over India, but it's not to saying that it has to be against Bangladesh interest or Bangladesh preference. So for US is the important thing also, but that how to engage with India that does not seem as that Bangladesh or other South Asian country as a subset of US policy towards South Asia. So it needs to be recognized in that way. From Bangladeshi perspective, even though China has certain kind of advantage, as Michael noted, that infrastructure and other, but we have to also remember that for decades that Bangladesh, for example, our main export product is garment, is going to, US is the second largest market. We are dependent on US for education. We are dependent US for other private sector company. So we really cannot choose on-site as opposed to other. We need to really make it a balancing act. But US policy, I think the challenging from US Washington perspective also is that there is a certain strategic question when it's come to even US, if US want to engage with Dhaka, there is certain kind of obstacle coming from other South Asian countries, saying if US want to sell some kind of a strategic weapon, for example, to Dhaka, would all other countries in South Asia will be okay with that? So how, from US policymaker perspective, they need to really find a delicate balance. And from Bangladeshi policymaker perspective, I think they need to make the case that why Bangladesh has its own value that really does not maybe to some extent align with India or other South Asian country, but Bangladesh has its own merit, as Michael noted, our geographical location, the population size, and the strategic location on the Bay of Bengal. If Bangladesh is out of this US policy periphery, and even say rest of the other South Asia work with US, it will not be even helpful for US to gain the broader policy goal that is pursuing for South Asia. So I think there is a recognition from US side that Michael noted. In addition, we have also seen recently US, I think Deputy Secretary level, someone is visiting Bangladesh and said that they are recognizing that they need to engage more with South Asian country that beyond India and Pakistan. I think that is a good step to start with, and we will need to go forward to see this cooperation is going forward. From Bangladeshi side, it also needs to do something, showing that it has merit at the same time that the concern we have seen recently in other area that has to be addressed.
Michael, as we know that you are an expert on Asia, especially South Asian geopolitics. You have closely observed the region for a quite long time. What's your prediction regarding the geopolitical condition of South Asia? Where do you see it in the next 10 years? And what role can the US play here?
Well, I'll take your second question first. I think that the U.S. has really failed for many years to conceptualize of South Asia through it being a wider geographic entity unto itself. The U.S. policy towards South Asia tends to be implemented through siloed approach, in which it looks at its relationship with India through one silo, its relationship with Pakistan through another silo, and until relatively recently, the war in Afghanistan through another silo. And the rest of South Asia, unfortunately, has often been given short shrift, so to speak, left in the lurch. I do think that the China factor is going to become something that will start to guide how the U.S. looks at the broader region. I think we'll see this in the coming years. I think it's unmistakable, and it's an unassailable point that U.S.-China rivalry will be the key U.S. foreign policy concern moving forward for many years. And there's support for that in Washington on bipartisan levels. The China factor is going to loom large. So that suggests to me that we will see the U.S. look at South Asia through the lens of Beijing and its competition with the U.S. And that means, unfortunately, that some of the things that we've talked about right now and some of the things that Anu and I had argued for in the article could be hard to implement, just because I think that the U.S. is going to be looking at how China is trying to scale up its influence across South Asia and how India is trying to compete with that and what role the US can play to try to wean these countries away from Chinese influence and more toward Indian influence. And we've seen over the last year or so some interesting high-level diplomacy on the part of US officials in which they're dealing with countries in South Asia that they don't typically deal with on high levels. So for example, just to name two, Maldives and Nepal. These are two countries that have perfectly good relations with the US, but they're not deep and substantive. And yet you've had a senior official at the Pentagon, Colin Kahl, interact with the counterpart on the Maldives side, and then Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, had a call with a top leader in Nepal. And I think the idea here is to try to build up relations with these countries in order to send a message that they should sign on to the U.S. Indo-Pacific policy, which, of course, at the end of the day is meant to counter Chinese power. So I think that's where things are going. With the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan happening, that means that Afghanistan increasingly will be less of an issue for the U.S. and its policy considerations. Pakistan will always be there, so to speak, a country that the U.S. will want to work with, but it's not a part of the Indo-Pacific policy in practice, just because Pakistan is so closely allied with China. India will continue to be, I think, the key U.S. player in Washington's strategic calculations, given the fact that so many in Washington view India as America's best strategic bet in South Asia in terms of a country to help the U.S. in this effort to counter the rise of China. Now, the extent to which India wants to play that game, that's something that can be discussed. India certainly is a big proponent of the Indo-Pacific policy and wants to help counter Chinese power, but perhaps not in the ways that the U.S. would like it to. And that's an issue that will have to be worked out in the U.S.-Indian relationship. But bottom line, I really think that the way in which the U.S. looks at the relationship the way in which the U.S. looks at South Asia in the coming years will be seen very sharply through the lens of China. And I think that the broader story of South Asian geopolitics, it will be seen through this very significant factor of China scaling up its influence in the region and how India responds to that and what that leaves for the other countries in the region that don't want to be caught up in this India-China rivalry, what they do. That'll be the way to watch the region in the coming years.
Okay. Anu, Bangladesh was not included in Biden's democracy summit. Would it play a negative role in the future US-Bangladesh relationship?
Bangladesh, I think it might play, but in insignificant way, because when we say about a country relationship, it really does not depend on particular period of time, let's say 5 years, 10 years. Probably we are saying US-Bangladesh relationship, let's say going forward 10 years, 20 years, 50 years period. After 5 years, nobody will remember this thing. But it could be better if it was invited. But we know there is a certain kind of problem over there. So that really kind of created a problem to inviting Bangladesh there. But in Michael's point, what he mentioned, that also has a dimension to your questions, that why Bangladesh is and the US policy problem in South Asia, the way they see it, South Asia. US policy, it mostly driven by to challenge China, challenge in South Asia, but many people also see this more as a reactionary tactics rather than proactive things. What China is doing, US is trying to react and counterbalance. The question is why US is not doing proactively that what need to be done in South Asia. One thing. Other thing is, if you look at the South Asian country, they primarily look at the economic incentive. South Asian country really does not want to be in a kind of security question and kind of broader geopolitical dilemma, except India, maybe most of the South Asian country, right? So if you look at the South Asian policy from US perspective, and it's mostly driven by the security and military dimension. Definitely there is a recognition that has to be done, but primarily force should be economic incentive. That is the problem. Now, other piece of this that Indo-Pacific Michael alluded to, that US aspiration that India has to play a bigger role, which is a good thing. Problem is here that the logistical question, what kind of things India can bring for South Asian country. We know that India is the only country who is opposed Belt and Road Initiative, for example. But at the same time, reality is India is the highest loan taker from Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, which is in Beijing. So India itself need infrastructure assistance from Beijing or Beijing-built bank. So you see that India really is unable to offer that kind of substantial thing that is required for other South Asian country. That will limit India's ability, how they can motivate South Asian country to work together. But there is a good side, that is in Indo-Pacific strategy is aspiration that Japan will also play a bigger role. And we know Japan has been building infrastructure in Bangladesh and other countries for decades. So that is a good thing. So, there is certain kind of way to address that what are the loop side and what are the positive side, and need to revise and looking at from the South Asian country what they are looking for, what they are interested in, rather than what Washington want to.
Anu, despite the various economic and geostrategic advantages of Bangladesh in South Asia, there seems to be a notion in the West that Bangladesh doesn't offer sufficient strategic value to warrant a close partnership. Why do you think that might be the case?
I think that is the main problem with the understanding and the discourse power Bangladesh has. Bangladesh does not have that voice international level saying that what value Bangladesh definitely has, and it always inclined to a particular government. I do not think that Bangladesh does not have a strategic value, as Michael and I argue in our piece. If someone look at Bangladesh population, Bangladesh economy, Bangladesh geostrategic location, Bangladesh definitely has. The problem is whether Bangladesh can assert as it has. So that has not been the case. It always portrayed by some other country and other reason. So if Bangladesh is able to increase its capability, whether it's come to defense power, whether it's come to economy and other, definitely someone will has to be recognized. And we have seen this notion has been changing. And US recognition is much better than before. It will take time. We are talking about, when we talk about a strategic value, grant strategy, these things are not really particular time period or frame. 5 years, 10 years is a long-term game. We need to prepare Bangladesh itself in that way. The problem is Bangladesh from the normative side, whether the Bangladesh governance is good, the democracy is good, those really limit sometimes the Western country to work with Bangladesh.
Michael, you have recently written an article in the Foreign Policy South Asia Brief on the US sanctioning an elite Bangladesh paramilitary force, Rapid Action Battalion, RAB, and some present and former personnel of that force. You tried to analyze some reasons behind the sanctioning. Would you please share your thoughts with our audience regarding the sanction?
Indeed, yeah, there's been a lot of speculation about this just because the timing was so striking. As I think Anu had mentioned earlier, you had a senior U.S. official in Dhaka just a few weeks ago who had been singing the praises of the relationship and talking about a desire to expand it, and then right away we had these sanctions come from there. I do not think that there is a geopolitical or strategic angle to this. I do not agree with the argument that the U.S. was trying to send a warning to Bangladesh that it was moving too close to China and it's time to teach Bangladesh a lesson. I don't agree with that at all. My sense is that it comes down to something very simple. The RAB had been on the radar of U.S. officials for quite some time. There had long been concerns about the RAB in Washington and about its alleged human rights abuses. And I imagine this is something that a concern that the U.S. officials had shared with their counterparts in Bangladesh, and they concluded that they weren't seeing the changes that they were hoping to see, and they then decided to make a big statement by waiting until Human Rights Day and including Bangladesh in its list of countries that it decided to sanction. My sense is that this decision does not signify that the U.S. is willing to downgrade its relations with Bangladesh, and it's concluded that the risks of antagonizing Bangladesh by sanctioning this preeminent security institution, that it's okay to do that and the relationship isn't worth pursuing. Not at all. I think that the idea here in very simple terms was to act on a concern that U.S. officials have long had and try to work with Bangladesh to address those concerns and to continue building out the relationship. That will be tough in the immediate term because obviously if your country is sanctioned by the U.S., you're not going to just jump up and smile and want to pick up where things left off. But I think this is just a case of bringing attention to an issue that had been worrying the U.S. for a long time, and U.S. officials had not seen the changes that they'd wanted to see, and they decided to act. It is significant, though, that I think this is really the first time in the term of the Biden administration, which is admittedly short to this point, the first time that it's been willing to place sanctions on an institution in a country that the U.S. regards as a friendly state. We could argue about whether the U.S. sees Bangladesh as a strategically significant country or not, but clearly it views Bangladesh as a friendly country and one that has good relations with. And so it's significant that it's been willing to do that. And it's been willing to impose sanctions on a country like that. Sometimes it's best to look at complex issues with the simplest explanation possible. And I think that's what happened here. The U.S. just wanted to send a statement about this security institution that it was very concerned about, and that's really what it comes down to.
Anu, following up on that question to Michael, do you think that this sanction will make a long-lasting impact on the West-Bangladesh relationship? Will it be a factor for Bangladesh to make a closer tie with China?
I don't think it will make a problem. As I mentioned earlier, when I look at the strategic partnership or relationship of a country, I don't look at 5 years period of time. I look at 50 years period of time. What Michael said, I completely agree with that. In addition to that, I would add and ask this question that if the both country was not the same regime, let's say if it were not Biden administration or in Dhaka it was different government, would this sanction will be there? So both of those countries, we know we are not a monarchy. Our regime in both country and government changes. But when we talk about the country-to-country relationship, is go far beyond particular government or regime or institution. Is a state that will be always there. And I think that there is a increasing recognition from US side that Bangladesh growing strategic importance. Maybe it is not in that level that Bangladesh would like to see, but that is increasing and that will continue to increase after even this government change and new government come and whatever reason. So that will not impact in a long-term strategic relationship. What it will do is that Bangladesh kind of a goodwill, Bangladesh image in a global forum, it will undermine because it's Bangladesh now with North Korea or Russia. It doesn't look really that good. That is a problem that has to be worked on. On China dimension, I think this maybe there would be some kind of reactionary things from Bangladeshi policymaker and some kind of rhetoric level, but broader policy dimension from the US side or China is more fundamental and more substantial. I look at what are the economic profile, what is the profile of military hardware dimension. Will that kind of policy change anything? Any of those countries saying that, oh, because of sanction, we're going to change anything on from what kind of assistance we are providing, whether is economic and other, that will not change. So I don't see that long-term effect, but definitely there is a short-term backsliding.
Anu, in your article published on War on the Rocks, you wrote that to create strategic leverage vis-a-vis China and India, Bangladesh needs to start addressing problems at home. How do you think the problems at home are affecting Bangladesh's ability to leverage stronger diplomatic positions with China and India?
I think that is the main problem for Bangladesh. For any country, even you see these days people talk about US challenge that face from China, and the scholars argue that main work has to be done at home to stabilizing democracy and institution. Same goes for Bangladesh. We have seen the different political party try to portray Bangladesh as it is their political interest, but there has to be some kind of national consensus that is the national interest beyond political differences and diversions. These are the key area where all political party and the government and all institutions will work together, which has been always the problem for Bangladesh. We have seen that when government changes, policy substantially changes, and that really does not go forward with a long-term strategic trajectory. So I think that is the main problem that we do not have in Bangladesh, that national consensus. And going from there, that the institutional problem, we did not do institutionalize on whether it's come to democracy, good governance, and other question. Government come and go, they will not be there, but the institution, that will remain forever. They basically put forward any country's policy. If you look at this country that we appreciate, whether US, Japan, or Western country, political party come and go, but their policy never changed. What happened to us? So I think that is the main problem. And the other problem, definitely the security side, to assert Bangladesh position in international affairs. We are not looking for Bangladesh that is an aggressive military power, but we have to have certain kind of defensive capability that can protect Bangladesh territory. In that sector, there has to be significant which has not been the case for many years. We have seen that Vision 2030 or Defense Goal 2030, that has to be strengthened. So I think that these are the key area in addition to definitely manpower, corruption, and other thing we all know. So definitely the China, US, India question will be there, but unless there is a national consensus, these are the challenge, these are opportunity, regardless of our differences, we will work for Bangladesh. This problem will never solve because the external power will come to divert and divide and rule. That we have seen in British era how Indian subcontinent work. So I think that dimension is there, that is still playing unless Bangladesh and Bangladeshi actor, particularly Bangladeshi elite, recognize this thing with merit, the problem will remain there.
Michael, do you have any opinion on this?
I agree with Anu, but I think that sometimes because of realpolitik, many countries get a pass and can certainly be seen as very strategically significant on the world stage, even if they haven't made the changes and the reforms that Anu argues have to happen in Bangladesh to improve its state in the global state of affairs, so to speak. And you look at the case of India, which has seen heavy levels of democratic backsliding. That's very clear. And yet, you don't hear the U.S. calling out India for its struggles with democracy and human rights. The U.S. has elevated India to a frontline strategic partner, and that's just a reality of what we like to refer to as realism, as realpolitik. That if a country or a set of countries in the world thinks that another country is important for reasons of national interest or strategic interest, those countries will be prioritized in foreign relations, regardless of what's going on internally in those countries. That's just a basic fact of international relations. It's nothing that can be done about that.
Anu, you once wrote that the tendency of smaller developing countries like Bangladesh to tilt towards China has been marked as a symbol of exporting the authoritarian Chinese model, where democracy dies down in the pretext of development. How do you think the US-led free and open in the Pacific FOIP strategy might work to safeguard democracy and rule of law in Bangladesh?
It will. I think the centerpiece of the Indo-Pacific strategy is the rule-based law. So we can also see the recent sanctioning is on that light, that there is a certain kind of light that red light that US will not allow to cross, whether it's Bangladesh and other country. That kind of check and balance is necessary. I think that country like Bangladesh and others, when sometime opposition and the voice are suppressed, then domestically it's very difficult to do something. And then the international community need to come forward and to work with together. To send some signal to particular government that there has to be a pluralistic society in this country, which is very difficult to do sometimes domestically. So for Bangladesh, I think that US cooperation to setting democracy, rule-based law, and this kind of normative things, that would be necessary. But seeing it from the vis-a-vis China, what they are doing, authoritarian and other, why it look kind of attractive to developing country, is basically two reasons. First of all, it provides some kind of quick economic benefit as it appears, and the particular regime in particular country probably see certain kind of benefit rather than national interest. So that are the attractive thing, but definitely from a country's national interest perspective for a long term is not really good in that aspect.
Michael, any take?
Yeah, I think an important point to make about the the FOIP or the Indo-Pacific strategy is that indeed I think that the normative elements can be very powerful. Who would disagree with the importance of rules-based laws and so forth and so on? But I think that operationalizing the strategy in the region will be a big challenge just because of China's entrenched presence and influence. One of the major components of the Indo-Pacific policy are the associated tools that come with it, like the Development Finance Corporation and the Blue Dot Network. These are new tools that are meant to facilitate the ability of the U.S. and its partners to sponsor new investments, infrastructure investments around Asia. But again, the U.S. cannot hold a candle to what China has been able to do with infrastructure assistance in the broader region, for sure. And another point, I think it's important to distinguish here, is that the U.S. has indicated that Bangladesh and other countries in South Asia, some of them at least, it sees them as a part of the Indo-Pacific policy. But I really think that the geographic focus of the Indo-Pacific policy will be more to the east, in East Asia and Southeast Asia. And that is because that's where the U.S.'s treaty allies are based, Japan, South Korea, and so on. And it sees that part of Asia as where the U.S.-China rivalry is most sharp and where it affects U.S. interest the most because of the South China Sea dispute, Taiwan, and the effects that those can have on key U.S. treaty allies and key partners like Taiwan. Now, the Ladakh crisis, the Ladakh clash between China and India in 2020, I think that did wake up U.S. officials to the fact that the western parts of Asia, the western portions of the Indian Ocean region, deserve more U.S. strategic focus and deserve more attention under the Indo-Pacific Agreement. But I do think in the near term, when we hear U.S. officials talking about the Indo-Pacific strategy, I do think that the focus will be on areas further away from Bangladesh's neighborhood in East Asia and Southeast Asia. Again, that may change, particularly if it perceives that China is trying to engage in activities, including provocative activities and threatening activities, as what it did with India, vis-a-vis India in Ladakh some time ago.
So, thank you so much. We are almost at the end of the program. Any final remarks, Anu?
I would just add about Indo-Pacific strategy what Michael said. Definitely the US Indo-Pacific strategy main focus should be security, let's say South China Sea and East Asia, but it has to be a little bit customizing when it's looking at South Asia and other, because military and security dimension may be secondary, but economic preference for country like Bangladesh is the priority, which has to be recognized.
Michael?
No, I agree completely with Anna. I just want to make one more point very briefly on the sanctions issue, which is important not to lose track of. The U.S. did not sanction any members of the ruling party in Bangladesh, which I think is very significant, which I think underscores an important point that the U.S. did not want these sanctions to imperil its relationship with Bangladesh, regardless of whichever party is in power. I think that's an important clarification that I wanted to make. So I'll end there.
Indeed, this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, Michael Kugelman and Anwar, for being with us. Dear viewers, in the last few decades, we have seen the rise of Bangladesh from a basket case nation to a prominent player in South Asian politics. Bangladesh's remarkable economic growth has also ensured a growing presence in the world economy. Due to this growth, we are looking forward to our graduation from LDC status in 2026 and onto the path becoming a strong developed nation. Meanwhile, Bangladesh has also gained an international voice by leading the advocacy for climate mitigation and adaptation action among the countries most vulnerable to climate change. Now we face the challenges of growth, which include the gradual closing of preferential trade agreements and the waning of aid-based economies. We also inherit a more precarious stake in the realm of geopolitics, where we need to maintain solid relations with multiple superpowers with opposing interests. However, as we are seeing from the recent sanction from the US, Bangladesh's internal issues are spilling outward to affect geopolitical ties. The perception abroad of Bangladesh's backsliding democracy and unreliable rule of law is also driving away a lot of potential FDI. Perhaps if these issues are not addressed urgently, even more bridges will be burned and Bangladesh might lose the valuable opportunity provided by its growth to curb out a bigger identity on the world stage. Thank you and good luck.